forged on the gridiron in September. Perfected in the magic of March.
Again, rebounded by Indiana. The game is over.
For the fans who love the crunch of the pads, prefer a dunk,
Oh, he just sucked the gravity.
and expect nothing but the best. It's Bigger 10. Here's Steve Deace.
And welcome to this week's episode of Bigger 10. I'm Steve Deace alongside Aaron McIntire. Let's get to it. The Big Five on Bigger 10. Aaron begins with Michigan State has a new football coach. It is Colorado football coach Mel Tucker, who originally took himself out of the running for this job once it became apparent that Luke Fickell of Cincinnati was Michigan State's top target. As we surmised a week ago on this show, he turned them down. There's just too much baggage with this job right now, and not the least of which is a potential NCAA investigation already alleged in the Curtis Blackwell trial under oath, NCAA violations. And since we've done this show last, he has signed Tom Mars from the NCAA enforcement staff to be his attorney in that case. And so that had a guy like Luke Fickell, who his star is on the rise, say, I'm going to pass for now. So Michigan State, desperate, doubled back to Mel Tucker, who on Monday was doing a PR tour of the state. On Tuesday evening, he was meeting with high-dollar donors, and then like 10 minutes later, he took the Michigan State job. So here's his bio. He spent 1 year at Colorado. You can't really judge him off that year. He went 5-7, but Colorado's had losing seasons 13 of the last 14 years. So you can't really judge that. Far more, I think more, I guess we would say, disconcerting is the defense, and that's his calling card. We'll get into his defensive background in a moment. But the defense at Colorado this year in year one under Mel Tucker slumped from 72nd to 95th in total defense in the country. You look, though, he's been a defensive backs coach at Ohio State, at Alabama, at LSU, the defensive coordinator at Georgia, but, Kirby Smart's the coach there, so he's really the defensive coordinator. But he was a very successful NFL defensive coordinator for the Jacksonville Jaguars, not so much for the Chicago Bears, where he got ran out of town there. So a bit of a mixed bag record. He wasn't on any want list for any of the openings this year. There is talk, well, this guy's a great recruiter. I don't know how great of a recruiter you have to be at Alabama, LSU, Georgia, and Ohio State. Aaron, those are the top 4 recruiting programs perennially in college football. I think you and I could probably recruit there at least pretty effectively. His first full class, he just signed at Colorado. It ranked right around, I think, 35th or 36th. Michigan State's class that got panned was 43rd, so not much difference. He signed 2 high school kids that were only 2 in this class that were in the top 400 in the top 24/7 or 247 composite. So to me, and I'm a Michigan fan. I mean, I wore the jersey today on purpose so that my bias for anybody that's not sure would be fully known. So take my analysis, handicap that going in. But it strikes me as a higher. But given all of the self-inflicted drama of the Michigan State football program, maybe they could use a little right now. What are your thoughts?
I don't really understand this at all at this point. This kind of strikes me as a break glass in case of emergency hire. I mean, he got his start in coaching as a graduate assistant with Michigan State. That's about the only tie to that program that I can think of. I just don't understand. And in the version of this that I heard anyway, and tell me if you know for a fact that any of this is wrong, is that he was not interested in this job even after he heard Luke Fickell was out of it. And then they backed the Brinks truck up, and then that's when he was interested.
That's one of the narratives out there. In fact, he is slated to make right now more than about $1 million more than Ryan Day.
Yeah, which I don't blame him at all. We're all capitalists here. That's why we do this show. I don't blame him for that at all. But if I'm Michigan State, I'm looking at this resume as a head coach. He was the interim head coach, I believe, for the Jacksonville Jaguars for 5 games. He went 2-3. Mm-hmm. He was 5-7 in his first season at Colorado. And yes, we're giving him the benefit of the doubt there. But Good grief. You're going to back the Brinks truck up for that? Are you kidding me? Why? Like I said, this is what I said last week. They should have just gotten by, I believe. Just elevate your interim, whoever the interim was now, whatever his name was.
Mike Tressel. Jim Tressel's little brother or nephew, I think. Yeah.
Elevate him for now. You can get by with saving a little bit of money, but you're going to back up the Brinks truck for a really, really unproven, untested commodity. Because come on, guys, he is. He is. I mean, when you have that type of background, that's some rarefied coaching air, that's for sure. But you're also in the shadows, at least in your coaching career, at the highest levels. You're in the shadows of who's really running the show at Alabama, at Georgia, at Ohio State as well. So I really just don't get this. I congratulate him for being the capitalist. But my goodness, you would have thought if you're Michigan State, tread water here. We don't know what's coming next. Don't make any rash decisions right now. So I don't get this. I really don't get this quite at all at this point.
Well, based on what you just said, gotta go ahead and give an early Merry Christmas to coaching agents in the Big Ten. Because the amount of calls to athletic directors in the next 24 hours about renegotiating your contract based on the market that Mel Tucker just set, with the resume that both you and I kind of went over, there's no indication whatsoever that he is worth this kind of money as a college coach. But I told you last week that I thought to get Luke Fickell even interested to come, they were going to have to offer him a Matt Rule kind of a deal. 8 years guaranteed, $7-8 million a year. This is kind of the poor man's version of that in a way that they're offering Mel Tucker. And so if they've just reset the market in the Big Ten, and I've got to imagine there are, beginning with Columbus, Ohio, several coaches, agents that have made phone calls to athletic directors already or will soon saying, hey, the price of poker just went up here in this neighborhood.
Yeah. And I guess that's one part of it. Ryan Day was probably going to get re-upped anyway, and he was going to get a raise at some point. And so, yeah, thank you to Mel Tucker for doing that. But if you're Michigan State again, a guy like Luke Fickell, that's worth the risk. Maybe that's worth the risk. A guy like this, it's just not. It's just not.
I'm with you on that. One other sidebar to this I thought was interesting is some of the national people are writing about what a danger sign this is for the Pac-12. All right, that this guy would bolt after 1 year and take over a Michigan State job that everybody understands comes with, it's difficult right now in the best of circumstances when you have Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State all humming to some degree. And Indiana is coming off its best season in 30 some odd years and might be a preseason top 25 team next August. And that's not even counting what happens, when you get to the Big Ten championship game in the other half of the league. So even in the best of circumstances, this is a difficult job right now. But throw in all the other baggage we've talked about. And the fact that he would bolt a Pac-12 job where yes, this is a lot more money, but he was making millions of dollars out there too. He was already a millionaire, very reasonable expectations. The fact he would leave and come to Michigan State in its embattled state after just 1 year at Colorado, some national folks are saying that is a shot across the bow of the state of Pac-12 football. You buying any of that? I think there is some merit to that.
Oh, it's not a warning shot. That is just the Pac-12 right now. I mean, your warning shot was years ago. Failing to get, multiple years now, failing to get a team in the college football playoff. I believe Washington is still the only team,
correct,
that's gotten to the college football playoff in this era so far. And then you just look at other anecdotal signs. I mean, the overall strength of the conference has been down for years. I don't know why this would be an additional, this is a big warning sign that they're headed for trouble, because they've been in trouble for a long time. And just look at USC's recruiting class. We've been through those numbers before. Just terrible. The number of teams that you would never guess in 1,000 years that outpace them in recruiting this class, and there's still another. I think there's still some more signing.
Nope, we just had the last.
We just
one.
had the last one.
Yep.
So the number of teams that outpaced them, at least in the early signing period, those are anecdotal signs as well. So this is just another shrimp of the Barbie of what the Pac-12 has become.
Well, post that second signing day, I've updated my total team talent ratings. And again, these are a measure of how good a roster could potentially be. All right, so it's not like a power rating. It's not like a considering the schedule and everything else. I put this metric together in order to combine it with those other analytics out there and help me with my preseason win totals, because there's every year now, when you look at all the early entrants to the NFL, you look at all the guys that come into school early, right out of high school for that first semester, that early enroll, we're seeing more and more guys that were on no one's radar the year before become household names in just one season. I mean, you look at the trend of how many guys have been winning the Heisman Trophy in recent years that were 30-1 or worse in the initial odds. I mean, that's the last several Heisman Trophy winners: Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, etc. Okay. And so we take a look at the 24/7 composite recruiting rankings. We go back the 4 incoming classes, and then we count fifth-year seniors if they're relevant on the depth chart, as well as transfers with the transfer portal. And whatever your recruiting rank was, or if you've overplayed your recruiting rank 1 through 5, we give you a point total. And we do this for all of the Power 5 teams. Now that recruiting is done for the 2020 cycle, all the NFL draft entrants have been declared. Here are right now the top 25 rosters. According to my total team talent rating in college football, Georgia has overtaken Alabama for the lead. They had a strong February signing period, but Alabama is still there solidly with the second most talented roster in the country. Ohio State is next. And then you can see there's a drop-off, and the teams become much more bunched. Oregon, for example, is 4th at 315 points, but that's only 15 points ahead of Clemson and Michigan, who are tied for 8th. Penn State at number 5, Oklahoma at 6, Florida at 7, Auburn and Texas tied for 10th. Notre Dame and Texas A&M, and then some teams that may surprise people. Tennessee, which is going to have several transfers eligible this year, to really bolster their roster. Remember, they finished this past season strong, so that's a team to keep an eye on. South Carolina, that had a strong second signing period. Kentucky, that just consistently has top 25 classes under Mark Stoops, and they retain guys, so they're not losing a bunch of guys early to the NFL. And then Florida State, LSU, that's low for them, but keep in mind they lost so many players early to the NFL draft, and it's hard to replace that in just one recruiting class. Mississippi State, Washington, Michigan State is still in there, but you can see the scores now really become the difference between number 21 Michigan State and a team I think that's 38th Iowa State is 8 points. So this is where we start to really see parity once we get past that 280 point mark, and there's about 30 teams within about 10 points of each other after that. So we'll update those again. We'll look at the Big Ten exclusively here in a minute. We'll update these again after spring ball, because there'll be another round of attrition when guys have a chance to see where they're at on a roster. You'll see a whole bunch more guys with the spring graduation period as well. You'll see a whole bunch more guys in April and May enter their names into the transfer portal once they've graduated and or know where they stand on a depth chart coming out of the spring. But as you look at those on a national level, Aaron, what stands out to you?
Well, I think we'll start at the top first, and we've seen this. I'm not breaking any news or any new ground to anyone listening to this podcast. If you've been alive and paying attention to college football for more than 5 minutes, that Georgia is one of the teams that doesn't recruit or doesn't drop off. They just reload, or whatever the phrase is. And we've seen their classes come to fruition several times, and they've had really, really, really good teams. And this, by all indications, will be another one of them. It's just, when I look at Georgia as a team, though, they do really good at recruiting. They play, they compete at the highest levels. It's just been Alabama. The years that they've had their windows opening, it's just been Alabama that's been standing in the way. And we'll see if this class maybe can push them over the top. But that, again, remains to be seen. Alabama, Ohio State, I mean, it's all the usual suspects in there. Again, I'm surprised about how high up Penn State is. I don't know why that keeps catching me off guard, but it makes I guess it makes sense at this point.
They just have a top 12 class every single year.
Yeah. It always catches me off guard, because it always seems like they're so quiet in the off season. But that we'll see where that goes. Going down to, I know you mentioned the thing about LSU. if you're a coach like Ed Ogeron, I mean, dude, you freaking hit the jackpot, and you could be called a journeyman, and you just got off of this amazing national championship, where a case could be made that your team is one of the best, if not the best, college football team, at the very least of this era, and you're coming down off the high of that, and now you're like, oh, poop. The only place to go from here is down. I think that's borne out in these things because, I mean, it's a double-edged sword, a victim of your own success with LSU losing so many people.
Basically, everybody went pro early that could, and then their coaching staff got gutted at the exact. Joe Brady gone. Dave Aranda took the head coaching job at Baylor. They've lost a couple of other assistants. This is the most. The most I've seen a team in major college football in my lifetime have to rebuild in season without a tragedy or an NCAA scandal. I've never or a coach, the head coach leaving or being fired. I've never seen anything like it.
It reminds me a little bit, and I don't think that the fate will necessarily be the same because then the SEC and they'll have great recruiting classes coming up through the ranks as well. And Coach O is a good coach, but it reminds me a little bit of John Beilein being a victim of his own success as well, where he's great at developing players and sending them to the next level. Guess what? That means they're going to the next level, and you got to find replacements to plug those holes, and I think that's kind of where LSU is right now. I don't really know that there's much of a point in trying to parse, like you said. Once you get past the 285 point mark, there's not a whole lot of a point to parsing that, and until you get to who actually has the coaching advantages of all of these.
That's when it begins to play in.
Exactly.
Yeah, because it is the Jimmies and the Joes more than the X's and the O's.
So you see Michigan State barely outrank Purdue. Do you really think that Michigan State's Mel Tucker is a better coach than Jeff Brom at this point?
No.
So there's things like that.
And Jeff Brom has a quarterback right now in the Plummer kid, and Michigan State doesn't.
Yeah. So it's things like that you want to start looking at, but those are things we'll look at more in depth as the season approaches.
Did you notice there's a name missing from that? There's a couple of big names missing, but so Indiana's on that list.
Mm-hmm.
North Carolina, which, Mac Brown, this is only a second recruiting class, but the previous coach didn't recruit too poorly there. Purdue's on that list. No USC on that list. Did you notice that? Yeah.
And talking about, this is life for the Pac-12 right now. I don't know what it's going to take. I don't know what it's going to take to change it. Unless I don't know if it's a matter of facilities or what. I don't know what the deal is. I know fan support, it's a different animal out west because it's a lot harder to get to but I just don't know what it's going to take for the Pac-12 to turn around. They have a terrible TV contract. Nobody has the Pac-12 network. I just don't know what it's going to take to turn the Pac-12 around because they've gotten all the big name coaches. It just seems like everything the big boys in that conference have tried just has not worked out or panned out yet.
Well, it's to Oregon's gain, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Let's take a look at where things stand with the total team talent ratings now, just in the Big Ten. And again, we will update these again around the end of April, 1st of May with the end of spring ball because we're going to see more attrition then. But Ohio State is number 1. Penn State is number 2. Michigan is number 3. I don't think it surprises anybody. There is a precipitous drop off after that. Those are really the 3 dynamic recruiting teams in the conference. Nebraska is trying to join those ranks. They've had 4 straight top 25 classes. But here's why their number's so low, Aaron. They have lost a ton of attrition already in Scott Frost's first class. So, I said a year ago on the Bigger Ten podcast that Nebraska was one more recruiting class away from getting to where Scott Frost wanted to go, but they've lost too much attrition from that class. So the 2018 recruiting class is essentially a loss. So he's really only had 2 recruiting classes there. You see Purdue poised for a step up, although the Boilermakers play a very difficult schedule in the fall. Indiana just consistently recruiting like a top 30 class. and retaining guys. And Tom Allen's he's got some consistency going there now. And if you're Michigan State, you're more concerned about being overtaken by Indiana right now, I think, than catching up with those top 3 teams. But as you take a look at these scores, you can see how bunched up the Big 10 West teams are. You look at Purdue has the highest, most talented roster right now, but you look at, their point total is only 13 points different than Wisconsin. And when you look at Wisconsin's renown with player development and everything else, they can make that up in, the next 6 months of player development, right? You know they can do that.
Yeah.
So you can see that the West race there looks pretty bunched up in terms of rosters, but what stands out to you?
Well, nothing necessarily, especially, again, going back to who has the greatest chance at upward mobility. That doesn't mean necessarily winning games. It's just improving your existing roster. It's, what you just said about Wisconsin. It's a team maybe like Iowa as well. These developmental programs. Honestly, all of the teams, you'll probably look across the country, all of the teams with the greatest chance for the most upward mobility are going to have to be developmental teams because of developmental, that's kind of what the word means. So nothing really stands out to me. I was a little bit surprised, and maybe I shouldn't be. Maybe this is just Iowa fan picking on Northwestern. I guess it's apples and oranges. But Northwestern having a better recruiting class than Rutgers. That kind of surprised me a little bit. But then again, Rutgers is just in a deep, dark hole right now. Kind of expected a little bit better from Illinois. It seems our transfer, forgive me if you've already said this, are transfer portal numbers in this as well?
The most recent transfer portal numbers are included, yes.
I'm a little bit surprised.
Now, there's a slew of guys waiting to see if they're going to get waivers to be eligible, too. And we'll find that out over the next few months. Yeah,
a little surprised Illinois' numbers are not better since they had quite a bit of success in the portal last year. But the rest of these don't really surprise me much at all.
Well, the situation with Illinois, they had success in the portal. They had to because they have not had a lot of success in the 4-year recruiting. Yeah. Minnesota is an interesting team to me because they're going to return a lot of top line players we know, like Rashad Bateman, for example. But their depth has taken a hit. They've lost a couple guys to the NFL. They lost Antoine Winfield early. They've had several guys. Because here's what happens too now. Minnesota's going to learn this. When you get really good, when you're a 7, 8, 9 win team, guys might be more patient to think, hey, I can beat the guy ahead of me out. But when you win 11 games and the guy ahead of me is coming back, that's when guys are like, I don't want to ride the pine another year. They're not going to replace me with him. They won 11 games with that guy playing Blank's position last year. And they've had several guys at the transfer portal along those lines. So their depth numbers are maybe not where you might otherwise think they are. They'll be an interesting team to watch this fall because their offensive starters are the best in that division, who they have coming back. But I don't know that their depth is there if they have the injury bug or lose a couple of key players, because this is the cost of success. And it's why, unless you're a dynamic recruiting program, it's hard to keep doing this year after year after year, because when you do start having success and guys are like, well, that guy ahead of me, I'm going to go somewhere else where I can play. And Minnesota has seen a little bit of that here so far this offseason.
Yes, and the reason, I looked at Minnesota as maybe one of the things that stood out to me, but it really doesn't. It kind of fits where they are. They have some talent there. They have some returning firepower, although they lost a few key pieces as well. But it doesn't shock me because of the attrition that they've experienced because of the success that you've had. So I think it's just safe to say Minnesota will be. When you have success, that means you have good players. So that's the other side of that coin as well. So they'll be a solid team, but they're probably not going to have the ability to maybe pop quite as much as they did last year as well, because you really rely. That offensive line for them this last season. That thing was scary. sometimes to watch, even if I had no stake in the game. And so you'll see if you have injuries in the trenches, that's when your depth really has to start shining. Because if you can create time for the quarterback to get rid of the ball, eventually wide receivers are going to get open. I don't care who it is. If you've got the elite wide receivers that Minnesota had, you like that use of the word elite in there, elite wide receivers that Minnesota had last year, or if you've got some new guys coming up through the ranks. I think it just all depends on how they continue to develop their trench and lineman play.
Well, and when you're playing Michigan in a cross-divisional game instead of Indiana like they did last year,
yep,
that's where you need more depth because your team gets more beat up when you're playing a tougher schedule. Let's get to basketball now. And Maryland is now becoming the team that a lot of people forecasted them to be at the start of the year when they were a consensus preseason top 10 team. And the reality is, Aaron, they have just not shot the ball well most of this season, particularly from three. Well, lo and behold, though, now they're shooting a lot better, and now they're on a run. And last Friday night, they go into Champaign with Illinois, tied for first place. They get way down at the beginning of the game, and then the rest of the game, they just absolutely curb stomp the Illini to come out of there with a key road win. They've now got, a 2-game lead in the Big Ten. It absolutely is theirs to lose. But I got to wonder, looking at their schedule down the stretch, it's pretty favorable. It's as favorable as you can get in a league where 11 of your teams are in the top 33 in Ken Palm. Like no one has a favorable schedule in the Big Ten. No one does. But theirs is one of the, shall we say, least unfavorable. It's absolutely their race to lose. But I wonder if we're going to look back here in about 3 weeks and say, hey, this was the juncture in which Maryland finally got over the hump and won its first Big Ten basketball championship.
Well, you talk about progression to the mean. It sounds like maybe they are starting to progress to the mean as far as the shooting goes. Having said that, we're taping this the afternoon after they nearly blew a home game to Nebraska.
I know, classic letdown spot though too.
Yeah. And so I'm not going to say that necessarily they've turned the page or are necessarily the prohibitive favorites yet, even though I'm staring at the standings right now and it would suggest that they are, but just because of how zany and wacky this Big Ten season has been. Right. I mean, would it shock you at all if Illinois, who's lost 3 in a row right now, would come back, go on another run, and then win?
Depends on
the conference?
It depends on if what Desomu's health is, because
that's true.
He went up for that game-winning shot last night against Michigan State, and his leg gave out, and they carried him off the court. We don't know anything else.
Yeah,
but it didn't. It's one of those things that just you wince because it just didn't look good. You know. But if he's healthy, no. I mean, you look at Penn State's won 5 in a row and several, or 6 in a row, and several are 7. I'm sorry, and several of them have been very difficult road slates at the exact same time. And that's a team that really doesn't have a point guard. I mean, Lamar Stevens is basically playing a point forward for them right now. You know, so you're right. It is a zany league, but what I think is impressive for Maryland is they were able to kind of make this climb without shooting it great from the perimeter. Mm-hmm. And now if they're going to shoot that way with the talent and the size and the length and athleticism they have, they become a very difficult out at that point.
Yeah, it definitely don't want to see them at home, which fortunately my Hawkeyes don't have to do anymore. But they are not a team that you want to mess with. And now we're starting to get into the part of the season where you talk about tournament matchups. And I don't want to get into that too much right now because we'll have plenty of time to talk about when that time comes. But they are starting, it's usually about this time every year. I'm talking to a Michigan fan. You know what I'm talking about. It's usually, if you're going to make a postseason run of any kind, it's usually about this time of the year where you start seeing those signs that, hey, this might be a special team. So I definitely think that if this is starting to become a trend with them where they are shooting better, look out, because they do have a ton of talent.
Let me just ask you as a Hawkeye fan, if you want to win the Big Ten tournament, and you're looking at the top seed on your half of the bracket, would you rather have that team be Maryland or Penn State? I'd rather have it be Penn State.
Probably, yeah.
Would you rather have a team be Maryland, or let's even say DeSumo is healthy? Would you rather have that team be Maryland or Illinois? I'd rather have it be Illinois.
Yeah.
Yeah, because here's the thing. They can still beat you. It'll be ugly. We've seen them win several ugly games this year. They can still beat you if they're not shooting it well because of their length and athleticism. Where they become really, really impossible to solve is if they are shooting it well. Which brings us to Michigan State, the only team that was consistently ranked higher than Maryland in all of the preseason polls. In fact, they were the highest ranked. They were the number one team. This is the first time a number one team in the preseason has fallen out of the top 25 by Valentine's Day since Kentucky back in 2014. It doesn't even happen, and it rarely has happened in the history of the AP poll. Now, they're still ranked in the top 10 in Ken Palm. They got a huge win last night at Illinois. What's happened with them? Because this is really the same. I know they don't have Langford. Izzo brought that up after the Michigan loss. But remember, they didn't have Javon Langford last year. I mean, they went to the Final Four without him. I think they haven't had anybody step up to give them that second three-point shooter that Matt McQuaid was for them last year. It just hasn't happened with Gabe Brown and some of these other guys. Just were not able to fill his shoes. And when you look at their team, I think what I'm the most concerned about for them is they're 3-7. You know, we have quad 1, quad 2 games in the net. Ken Palm calls them tier A, tier B, tier C, tier D, based on the efficiency of your opponent and where you're playing them. Okay. In tier A games, Michigan State is now 3-7. With the win last night against Illinois. Only 3-7, Aaron, and all but one of its games the rest of the year are, according to Ken Palm, tier A games. That soft slate we talked about a month ago where it just seemed like they got every game at home. Well, the pendulum is swinging the other way now. We talked about they have 3 stretches in the second half of this, or from mid-January on, where they have 3 out of 4 on the road, and now they're hitting those stretches in the schedule. So I don't think they're going to win the championship in the regular season, but I'm telling you, I've watched this with Michigan State on more than one occasion with Tom Izzo. You still don't want to see him in your bracket in March. Nope. He just knows how to coach that month.
Nope. The thing about the schedule, that is absolutely no bueno. That's my big idea. That's my big deep thought with Aaron for today. So I would not be exactly looking forward to that if I'm a Michigan State fan. But I think what's happened with Michigan State, we often put Michigan State in the same tier. At least I do, so I'll speak for myself. I put Michigan State often in the same tier as the Kentuckys, the Dukes.
Well, they belong there in the Izzo era.
And they belong there. Here's the deal, though. They're not like those schools. Tom Izzo, for the most part, he still develops players quite a bit.
True.
And so this is, I think what we're seeing here is what happens if a Mike Krzyzewski or a John Calipari have a recruiting class that they're trying to actually develop, not just a bunch of one-and-dones, that they're actually trying to develop, and a couple of guys miss. I think that's all.
That's a good analysis.
Because Michigan State is in that top tier because of Tom Izzo, because he's a good coach. They're not in that top tier because they're getting one-and-dones every single season. So I think a lot of there's stuff off the court that's going on right now, but as far as just on the court coaching goes, I think Izzo needs to be cut some slack, because that's really what Michigan State has relied on, is his coaching, and that's why they're often in that upper echelon of college basketball teams and in those conversations.
I think that's really solid analysis and pretty fair, and that's coming from a Michigan fan. All right, so let's come back after the break, and we'll play our weekly game of Big Ten Would You Rather.
Bigger 10 is brought to you by Michigan Podcast. If you like what you're hearing today and would like to support us, head on over to Patreon, patreon.com/Michigan Podcast, where if you live somewhere where sports wagering is illegal, you can find Steve's picks for various games. So far in basketball, college basketball this year, he's been on fire. That's patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. You can get his game day picks, which he posts almost every day now, for just $5 a month. In the process, you can say thank you for creating this podcast on YouTube or via podcast, wherever you listen. Patreon.com/Michigan Podcast.
Back here on Bigger 10, let's play a little Would You Rather. You ready to go, Aaron?
You know it.
All right, let's go. This one is for you. Would you rather be Scott Frost Or, now we know the name, Mel Tucker, the next Michigan State football coach. Which of those two guys would you rather be?
Scott Frost. Right now, as of this very moment, definitely Scott Frost. I don't think there's no question about it, because at least at Nebraska, I may have some narcissism problems, you know, but you know what I don't have, at least not
Michigan,
right now.
Ohio State, and Penn State.
Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State, and maybe NCAA violation and penalties coming down the line. So I've got a lot of problems, but I don't have the same problems that Michigan State has right now. So I would definitely rather be Scott Frost.
Yeah,
I need to go take a Silkwood shower right now, but that's
that from the Iowa fan. Yeah. That's a good point, because if you're at Michigan State, you can't make, you know, Michigan, Ohio State, or Penn State tank, you know, drive into a ditch. Not that we haven't seen particularly Penn State and Michigan in recent years do that, but they did that to themselves. Like, you can't make them do that at Michigan State, and you can't make Curtis Blackwell's under oath allegations of NCAA violations go away either. Not that Scott Frost does not have some problems. He absolutely does. The bloom is off that rose, but your point that his problems are more manageable on his own than what Mel Tucker is inheriting, that's a valid point.
All right, this one's for you. If you're an up-and-coming, unproven coach, would you rather take the huge payday or go somewhere you know you can win?
Well, I assume the somewhere define for me somewhere you know I can win. Are we talking like...
So if you're an unproven, up-and-coming coach and you have your choice of a team that's in a really, really tough division, but that's willing to pay you $1 billion to coach for 5 years, or you can go to Akron and improve your resume as an actual coach, where would you rather go? All
right, because that's why I wanted to know, are you asking me in the context of a Mel Tucker, who's obviously beyond an Akron?
Yeah.
Okay. If I'm an up-and-comer, then I would go first where I can win, where I can build my own resume. You know, you look at an Urban Meyer and you look at his course trajectory, began at Bowling Green and then went to Utah and then went to Florida and then went to Ohio State. Okay. You look at our coach, Jim Harbaugh. He started at non-scholarship San Diego and then went to Stanford when they had the longest or one of the longest bowl droughts in college football. So I think the ability to hone and learn your craft and build up your resume from there, rather than taking a path where maybe you take a job you're not ready for and it consumes you. And there was Bartles and James was a famous wine cooler when I was a kid, and they were very famous for their folksy ads. And the tagline in their ad was "Serving no wine before it's time." Okay, so now if you start getting into comparing a Power 5 job versus another Power 5 job, I think that's situational. Like, if I were Mel Tucker, I'd have stayed at Colorado. I'd admit, if Mel Tucker goes 7-5 once in the next 2 seasons or 3 years at Colorado, he's getting an extension. Okay. If he only goes 7-5 once at Michigan State, taking over for their winningest coach of all time, his ass is fired. So I think once we start getting into comparing, I'm an established coach or I'm already a coach and I'm comparing gigs, I think it becomes purely situational. But in your case, as a young up-and-coming coach, I would rather go. Now, I would not say Akron is that kind of a MAC program. It doesn't have a great tradition. Maybe more of a Central Michigan or Toledo that has won a lot of games in the MAC, or a Miami of Ohio kind of a school. Then I would absolutely take a look at that. And if you look at who's navigated your scenario very smartly, look at Joe Brady. I mean, I think he was really smart to leave LSU. I mean, you just coordinated the greatest statistical offense in college football history. What in the world? And all those guys are gone. What do you do for an encore? And so you go to the NFL and you take over at Carolina, and they're either going to keep Cam Newton or let him go. If they let him go, then you have a brand new guy coming in there and you're going to get a long leash to coordinate with your own guy. If they keep him and you resurrect Cam Newton, that bolsters your resume all the more. If they keep him and Cam Newton regresses, Cam Newton's the one that's going to get the blame because he was regressing before you set up. It's a no-lose scenario. So I think Joe Brady is an example of a guy that has managed his resume appropriately. For you, would you rather be a Big Ten football official or one of the conference's basketball referees? What's the tougher job?
I think the tougher job for sure is one of the basketball referees.
Absolutely it is. I agree. Yeah.
I think there's no doubt about that. For one, there's only 3 officials, I believe, on the court.
And everybody knows your name.
Everybody knows your name. I'm going to be yelled at by some guy named Fran about how I'm a bleeping cheat. You know,
everybody in Michigan knows Terry Clymer is from Ohio, and yes.
And there's the close quarters too. Some of these fans can get nuts.
Yeah,
I mean, it's short for fanatic. Some of these fans can get nuts. You're further away from them on a football field. You know, I would want to get in. I would want to get in. So one of the things I was trying to do in thinking about this is building a case for why I would want to be a basketball official. And I'm thinking, well, at least I can fix things. But I don't really know. It's just such a difficult sport to officiate because the mistakes...
You don't mean fixing the outcome.
Exactly.
In this era of legalized sports wagering, I wanted to clarify that.
Yes.
Okay.
No.
All right.
Fix the issues. What contact?
Like I can call travel and charges the way they should be called.
Yeah. But the officials or the mistakes, the infractions in football are so much more obvious for the most part. There are harder things to call, but they're so much more obvious than in basketball.
Yeah.
Where you're split, just really split second decisions. Like every single,
and you're always getting worked by the coaches.
Always getting worked. A quick aside: did you see that Chicago Tribune piece about retiring Big Ten ref?
The guy that officiated the biggest scam game in the history of the Big Ten.
I wasn't going to say anything, but that was
screw him.
That was pretty interesting.
Yeah, that self-awareness is dead. Chapter 4912. Yes,
indeed. This one is for you. Would you rather go into the tournament season with experience or talent?
Almost every year, I would say talent. And I remember when I was a kid and Bill Walton picked the Fab Five on CBS's NCAA tournament preview. He picked the Fab Five when they were freshmen to win the NCAA tournament. I mean, Duke had Bobby Hurley and Christian Laettner together, okay? And he picked, and there were several great teams that year. Shaquille O'Neal was still at LSU. He picked Michigan with an all freshman starting 5 to win the tournament. And people thought, hey, it's just nutty Bill Walton, right? He's had a screw loose ever since he went to too many Grateful Dead concerts, if you know what I'm saying, right? And he said, hey, man, I learned from John Wooden. Give me talent over experience. And those guys have otherworldly talent. So most years I would take the talent. This year, because I think the talent is so spread out and there's not a great year of one and dones, I think I would take the experience. And I go back to my own experience with Michigan in the Bahamas at the start of the year, where you had North Carolina with a freshman point guard. You had Oregon bringing in some high-rated recruits, but guys that the pieces hadn't fit together yet. Gonzaga was replacing a couple guys and a couple of injuries. And we go into that tournament with a proven senior point guard in Xavier Simpson, who he's going to be one of the winningest players in the history of Michigan basketball by the end of this season. Same for John Teskey. And so we go in there even with a rookie head coach, but because we had the experienced point guard and a couple of other key experienced pieces, I think we were able to kind of hit the ground running and win that tournament when those other teams were still kind of trying to find themselves. But and so that's another reason why this year I think I'd make the exception. Almost every other year I'd say talent, but this year I think I'd take the experience. I think the talent's much more spread out and even. All right, that's going to bring us one more final segment. It's the Twitter poll and our question of the week. We'll get to those next.
Bigger 10 is also brought to you by Wolverine Digest from Sports Illustrated. You can find that at wolverinedigest.com. For all of you Michigan fans, you can find a daily rundown of all the hottest topics from basketball and football to recruiting and much, much more. That's wolverinedigest.com, a part of Sports Illustrated.
This week's Twitter poll, we asked you, how many Big Ten teams do you think make it into the NCAA basketball tournament? Some current bracketologies have 12, but less than 5% of you think that many will make it in. 19% say 11, 50%, a clear majority, think it's 10, and about a quarter of you, 25.9%, say 9. I think it'll be 10. I think there will be some teams and it really beating each other up here down the stretch. You have a guess at what you think the number is going to be, Aaron?
I think it's going to be 10 as well, because I'm looking at the bottom of the Big Ten standings. I think 10 is a good bet. I think it could be as many as 11, but tell me of these teams who have fewer or who are more than 2 or more games below 500, who you think is going to get to 10 wins, which I would say is probably about the mark you would probably make to see if a team has a legit shot. Indiana, Michigan, Ohio State, Nebraska, Northwestern, they're done.
Yeah, Indiana won't get to 10 wins.
No,
I
think Michigan has a pretty good chance.
I think Michigan has a chance, but I don't think it has to because of it. I mean, it's got the number 3 strength of schedule right now and played a month without Isaiah Livers. So as long as they don't tank down the stretch, I think they will get in. It might be a low seed, but I think they'll get in. I think Ohio State, if they get a couple of guys back, maybe could get to 10 wins, but their overall, I mean, the computers and analytics love Ohio State. The net ranking does, the Ken Palms do. Terrible grammar there, my bad. But I would say Indiana, no. I think Indiana and Minnesota are the 2 teams that take the league from 12 to 10 on Selection Sunday, which is only about 30 days away. Let's get to this week's question of the week, and it comes from Mullen Labe. I like that name. Why don't we allow the fullness of Mark D'Antonio's tenure to come out before anointing him a Hall of Fame coach? What if there are major NCAA violations? That's a fair point, I think. I mean, and when we discussed this last week, Aaron, we really tried to separate what we saw on the field with off the field, because he's had other off the field problems, not even just NCAA
for a long time.
Yeah, allegations here. So with Mark D'Antonio, you have to separate those 2 things. But I think that's a fair criticism. What do you think?
Yes, it's fair, and we also discussed last week how this perception, so there's on the field, what you've done on the field strictly as a coach, not how you are as a human being. So I think people conflate Hall of Famer with great guy, great coach.
Sure.
And Hall of Famer something else. So we're talking about Hall of Famer strictly from the numbers perspective, I should say, and he's definitely there. As far as the great guy aspect, the Hall of Fame of great men, well, that's going to do it for Bigger Ten this way.
And his record is, did we mention his record is Hall of Fame? Yes, yeah. I hear you.
Yeah. So I heard another narrative this week. I don't know if you buy this at all, that he was upset with Michigan State's plans for his exit. So
I saw that. Yeah. Rico Beard's a well-known Sparty insider back in Michigan, and he said that that's what his sources were telling him. And I knowing his track record is in being connected to Michigan State, I think there's something to that. And I got to tell you, I think that's actually worse than quitting because of NCAA allegations. And here's why. Because you just effed your team that paid you millions of dollars for 13 years out of petty spite. I think having NCAA allegations alleged against you in a sworn deposition, we're not approving of NCAA violations, but we understand why a coach would say, if that's going to dangle out there, I can't recruit, I'm done, right? But doing this to your team right before signing day, just knifing your own school because of some kind of petty spite transfer of power, that is so douchey and Bush League. I think I'd rather have my coach quit over NCAA violations.
Yeah, I don't believe this new narrative one bit.
You don't? Okay.
No. The timing is way too suspect.
Well, regardless of whatever the motivation
it's bad.
is, it's bad. Yeah. Either either it's a urination contest or I got caught cheating. Either way, the outcome is the same. All right, thanks for tuning in here this week on Bigger Ten. And remember, like, rate, subscribe, 5-star review if it's YouTube here or podcast, whichever way you access us. The more of those we get helps us to spread the word about what we're doing each week here on Bigger Ten. You can follow us on Twitter at Bigger Ten all week long between episodes as well. We keep you updated on our thoughts with everything going on surrounding the conference. And until next week, this is Bigger Ten.